What if one mountain could send water to 3 different oceans? While just hours away, temperatures plunge to -61 degrees Celsius. What if one of the richest dinosaur graveyards on Earth sat beside a wetland bigger than some countries? From glaciers older than civilization to Badlands hiding 75-million-year-old bones, Alberta doesn't follow rules. It breaks them. Here are 25 absurd facts that prove Alberta is one of the most extreme places on Earth. Part 25. The ice field that feeds 3 oceans. Welcome to Snow Dome, one of only 2 hydrological apexes in North America. A rare summit where meltwater can ultimately reach the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and Hudson Bay simultaneously. Rising about 3,456 meters or 11,339 feet, Snow Dome sits at the junction of 2 continental divides. Below it lies the Columbia Icefield, covering roughly 325 square kilometers or 125 square miles, with ice up to 365 meters or 1,200 feet thick. But there's a crisis beneath that beauty. The Athabasca Glacier, the icefield's most accessible arm, has lost over half its volume since the late 1800s and retreats 5 meters or 16 feet every year. At current rates, it could lose 90% of its ice this century, slowly shutting down the rivers that millions of people depend on downstream. And as the ice pulls back, something buried for millions of years is finally coming to light. Part 24. Dinosaur capital of the world. Alberta isn't just Canada's dinosaur country. It's one of the dinosaur capitals of the entire world. Drumheller and the surrounding Badlands sit at the heart of one of the richest fossil territories, producing more complete dinosaur skeletons per square kilometer than almost anywhere on Earth. Dinosaur Provincial Park alone has revealed fossils from over 60 species. And since 1884, over 500 museum-quality specimens have been pulled from these canyons. Carved by the Red Deer River over millions of years, this landscape is constantly exposing 75-million-year-old bones. So quickly that scientists are still racing to document what the Earth keeps uncovering. Alberta's fossil record is so extraordinary that museums across Europe, Asia, and North America are filled with specimens found right here. Walking these Badlands doesn't really feel like hiking. It feels like stepping into deep time. But Alberta's story doesn't start with bones. It starts with ice that refuses to melt. Part 23. Alberta's deep freeze record. Fort Vermilion holds a record nobody wants. On January 11, 1911, this northern community recorded -61.1 degrees Celsius or -78 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature ever measured in Alberta. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes, breath crystallizes instantly, and trees explode from frozen sap. Northern Alberta regularly sees winters below -40 degrees Celsius or -40 degrees Fahrenheit, where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet at the same number. This cold shaped how humans and wildlife adapted to one of Earth's harshest climates. Yet hours south, the landscape transforms into something borrowed from the Southwest. Part 22. The inland sea that split a continent. Alberta wasn't always landlocked. For millions of years, it sat beneath a vast inland sea. During the Cretaceous period, roughly 75 to 100 million years ago, the western interior seaway split North America in half, stretching from the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. Alberta sat along the shifting western shore of this ancient ocean, where dinosaurs walked coastal plains and massive marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs hunted in warm, shallow waters. As the seaway advanced and retreated over millions of years, it deposited thick layers of sediment that became the coal, oil, and natural gas Alberta is famous for today. The western interior seaway shaped not just Alberta's geology, but its entire economy, turning ancient marine life into the fossil fuels that power modern civilization. And while those seas receded millions of years ago, Alberta still holds water in the most unexpected places. Part 21. Peace Athabasca Delta. Imagine a wetland so vast it works like an airport hub of migration. An entire continent's birds funnel into one living maze of water. The Peace Athabasca Delta isn't just remarkable, it's irreplaceable. Covering approximately 321,200 hectares or 794,000 acres, it's the largest inland freshwater delta in North America, formed where the Peace, Athabasca, and Birch rivers converge near Lake Athabasca. All four major North American bird migration flyways converge here, meaning over 1 million waterfowl pass through in a single autumn. The delta is also a Ramsar wetland of international importance, and it sits within UNESCO World Heritage Site Wood Buffalo National Park, two of the highest conservation designations on the planet. But this system is increasingly threatened by upstream dams, oil sands development, and climate change. And at the center of all that life sits a park that dwarfs entire nations. Part 20. The glacial lake that drowned continents. Alberta once sat on the floor of a vanished megalake so enormous it makes the Great Lakes look like puddles. After the last ice age, melting glaciers pooled behind towering walls of ice, forming Glacial Lake Agassiz, a freshwater inland sea that at times covered over 44,000 square kilometers or 170,000 square miles across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, and into the US. At its peak, Lake Agassiz was one of the largest freshwater lakes in Earth's history, and it didn't drain gently. When its ice dams failed, the lake unleashed catastrophic floods that tore across the land, carved valleys, and may have triggered climate shifts. One massive flood possibly dumped enough fresh water into the North Atlantic to disrupt currents and plunge the Northern Hemisphere into the younger Dryas cold snap. But the lake didn't just disappear. It left a fingerprint that still defines Alberta today. Flat prairies plains built from fine lake sediment turned into rich agricultural soil. And those floods didn't just shape land, they left ecosystems thriving in isolation. Part 19. The oil sands, fuel buried in sand. Beneath northern Alberta's forest lies one of Earth's largest petroleum deposits. But it isn't liquid oil, it's bitumen, thick petroleum mixed with sand, clay, and water. The Athabasca oil sands contain an estimated 1.7 trillion barrels of bitumen, with roughly 170 billion barrels currently considered recoverable using modern technology, making it one of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Extracting it isn't drilling, it's industrial-scale mining. Companies either heat the sand or inject high-pressure steam to force the oil free. Some mining sites move more earth each year than the Panama Canal project did. Today, Alberta produces roughly 3 million barrels daily, making Canada a top global oil producer. This resource made Alberta wealthy, funding infrastructure and services nationwide. But the environmental cost is massive. Tailings ponds, deforestation, and carbon emissions make the oil sands hugely controversial. And while oil shaped modern Alberta, another resource carved its earliest identity. Part 18. Athabasca Sand Dunes. Desert near the Arctic. Alberta hides a secret that looks airlifted from North Africa and dropped into boreal forest. Along the southern shore of Lake Athabasca lie the Athabasca Sand Dunes, just 200 kilometers or 124 miles from the Arctic tree line, one of the largest active sand dune systems in Canada. Formed around 8,000 years ago, these dunes began as massive sand deposits left behind by retreating glaciers. Over time, wind sculpted them into shifting ridges that stretch for more than 8 kilometers or 5 miles and reach up to 12 meters or 39 feet high, while ancient glacial mounds called kames tower up to 60 meters or 197 feet. What makes this surreal is it's surrounded by boreal forest, wedged between rivers and lakes, and a landscape that sees snowfall 6 months a year. And if a desert near the Arctic seems impossible, wait until you see what the wind does on the other side of the province. Part 17. Lethbridge, where winter can reverse in hours. Winter in southern Alberta doesn't fade, it flips. temperatures plunge to -30 degrees Celsius or -22 degrees Fahrenheit, then jump above freezing in hours. Welcome to Lethbridge, one of Canada's most Chinook-prone cities. Chinooks are warm, dry winds that roar down the Rockies when Pacific air compresses and heats rapidly. In 1962, nearby Pincher Creek recorded a 41 degrees Celsius or 106 degree Fahrenheit rise in just 1 hour, one of the most dramatic temperature changes ever measured. These winds melt half a meter or 20 inches of snow overnight, earning the nickname Snow Eaters. But while Chinooks bring warmth, other parts of Alberta experience cold so extreme it's killed unprepared travelers. Part 16. The Rockies built backward. Alberta's Rocky Mountains are geological rebels. Unlike most mountain ranges formed by volcanic activity, the Canadian Rockies were built through a process called thrust faulting, where massive slabs of ancient sedimentary rock were shoved eastward over younger layers. These mountains are made of rock that's older at the top than at the bottom, completely backward from how geology normally works. The Lewis Thrust Fault, one of the most significant geological features in the Rockies, moved rock layers over 80 kilometers or 50 miles eastward, creating the dramatic peaks we see today. These aren't volcanic fire mountains. They're ocean floors pushed skyward by unimaginable continental force. And those ancient sea fossils aren't the only remnants of Alberta's aquatic past. Part 15. Badlands and hoodoos. Desert scenery and snow. Alberta's Badlands look like a slice of Arizona dropped onto the Canadian prairie. Around Drumheller and Dinosaur Provincial Park, deep canyons, layered rock, and towering hoodoos rise from the valley floor. Carved by the Red Deer River and relentless erosion, this landscape exposes layers of rock built up over tens of millions of years. Wind, water, and time have stripped it down into a maze of ridges, cliffs, and valleys. Hoodoos form through a slow but relentless process. A hard capstone protects the softer rock beneath it, delaying erosion just long enough for everything around it to wear away, leaving behind tall, mushroom-shaped pillars. The result is a landscape that feels dry, rugged, almost desert-like, completely out of place in a province better known for snow and sub-zero winters. And just when Alberta looks like a desert, it flips again into something completely different. Part 14. Frank Slide, a mountain that collapsed in seconds. At 4:10 a.m. on April 29, 1903, the town of Frank, Alberta was asleep. 90 seconds later, their town was buried, making the Frank Slide the deadliest rock slide in Canadian history. Around 82 million tons of limestone sheared off Turtle Mountain, thundered 300 meters or 984 feet down the slope, and buried the eastern edge of town and a coal mine entrance in under 2 minutes. Between 70 and 90 people were killed, most still buried under the rubble today. The Blackfoot and Kootenai peoples have called it the mountain that moves. And here's the chilling part. Turtle Mountain still shows measurable movement, and modern monitoring tracks its stability because the conditions that made the slope dangerous haven't vanished. And just east of these unstable mountains lies a zone that looks like a desert and still sometimes acts like one. Part 13. A park bigger than countries. Bigger than Switzerland. Bigger than Denmark. Wood Buffalo National Park in northeastern Alberta is Canada's largest national park and the second largest in the world, covering 44,807 square kilometers or 17,300 square miles. Created in 1922 to protect one of the last free-roaming wood bison populations, the park now shelters thousands of these massive animals alongside wolves that have sustained a natural predator-prey balance for generations. It also contains the world's only natural nesting habitat for the endangered whooping crane, which they were pulled back from near extinction entirely. Beyond its wildlife, the park also holds massive karst sinkholes, salt plains, and the vast Peace Athabasca Delta, all beneath one of the darkest skies on Earth, where the northern lights ripple overhead. Wood Buffalo isn't just a park, it's an entire civilization of wilderness hidden in Canada's north. And long before it was protected, The plains surrounding it were the stage for one of the most ingeniously violent hunting traditions in human history. Part 12. Palliser's Triangle, Canada's near desert on the prairies. In 1857, British explorer Captain John Palliser looked out across southern Alberta and declared it forever comparatively useless, a desert extension of the American Great Plains that he believed was unfit for large-scale farming. Fortunately, the Canadian government ignored him. The region that now bears his name, Palliser's Triangle, is a semi-arid steppe covering much of southern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan, receiving some of the lowest annual rainfall in Canada. It sits in the rain shadow of the Rockies, where Pacific moisture drops its rain before reaching the plains. During the Dirty 30s drought, the Triangle devastated 7.3 million hectares, forcing almost 14,000 farms to be abandoned, and triggered one of Canada's largest mass migrations as tens of thousands fled. Yet today, that same land grows wheat, canola, and beef that feeds Canada and beyond. Palliser's Triangle is proof that what looks like a desert can become a breadbasket. Part 11. The Milk River that crosses the border twice. Rivers don't usually get confused about which direction to flow, but the Milk River in southern Alberta didn't get the memo. The Milk River is one of the few rivers in North America that flows north into Canada from the US before looping back south across the border into the Missouri River system. This bizarre route is a leftover from glacial reshaping during the Ice Age, when advancing ice sheets blocked the river's original path and forced it to carve a new channel northward. The river flows through dramatic coulees and canyons, including Writing on Stone Provincial Park, creating deep valleys into otherwise flat prairie. Despite its modest size, the Milk River has been critical for irrigation, indigenous trade routes, and wildlife habitat. Its backward flow is a geological quirk that proves Alberta's landscape still operates on rules written by ancient ice. And those ancient glacial forces didn't just reroute rivers above ground. They built hidden plumbing systems beneath the mountains themselves. Part 10. Karst landscapes, land that swallows rivers. Maligne Lake in Jasper is the largest natural lake in the Canadian Rockies, stretching roughly 22 kilometers or 14 miles long and plunging nearly 100 meters or 328 feet deep. But its most remarkable secret hides underground. The lake feeds the Maligne River, which flows into nearby Medicine Lake, a place that appears to drain itself. In winter, Medicine Lake nearly empties as water vanishes into a vast underground karst system, slipping through cracks in the limestone and traveling unseen beneath the mountains. That hidden water eventually resurfaces downstream, carving Maligne Canyon, one of the Rockies' deepest limestone gorges, with walls plunging 50 meters or 164 feet. Above ground, Spirit Island, a tiny forested islet, sits peacefully in glacial turquoise water, yet it floats above underground plumbing tunneled through solid mountains. Alberta's Rockies aren't just mountains, they're a plumbing system. And while water carves tunnels silently below, one Alberta lake turns its underground chemistry. Part 9. Abraham Lake, frozen methane towers. Every winter, Abraham Lake transforms into one of the most surreal landscapes on Earth. Beneath its frozen surface, thousands of white bubbles stack in vertical columns, creating patterns that look like alien jellyfish suspended in ice. These aren't air bubbles. They're frozen methane gas. Decaying organic matter at the lake bottom releases methane, which rises toward the surface and gets trapped in layers as the lake freezes. The bubbles stack upon each other throughout the winter, creating ghostly towers of gas locked in crystal clear ice. Abraham Lake is a man-made reservoir, created in 1972 by damming the North Saskatchewan River, but its methane bubble phenomenon has made it a global sensation. Photographers travel from around the world to capture the otherworldly ice formations. But here's the danger. If the ice cracks and the methane is ignited, the bubbles can briefly flare. The lake's beauty is powered by chemistry beneath the ice. And while methane bubbles freeze in lakes, other Alberta landmarks burn year-round. Part 8. Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. For 6,000 years, Plains indigenous people carried out one of the most sophisticated hunting systems in human history by turning the landscape itself into a tool. Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump is one of North America's oldest, largest buffalo jump sites. Hunters guided herds toward cliff edges using cairns and runners, then stampeded them over an 11-meter or 36-foot drop. Communities butchered and preserved meat for winter survival. This wasn't random slaughter. It was sophisticated, communal, and essential. The UNESCO World Heritage Site reminds us how deeply humans shaped Alberta's ecology before Europeans arrived. And just as the cliff itself was a canvas for strategy, nearby sandstone cliffs became a canvas for something more permanent. Part 7. Writing on Stone – Sacred Cliffs. In southern Alberta's Milk River Valley, sandstone cliffs rise like a natural museum, except the exhibits were carved and painted by people over thousands of years. Writing on Stone Provincial Park, known to the Blackfoot as Icinape, holds one of North America's largest concentrations of Indigenous rock art. Thousands of images of warriors, animals, spirits, and battles are etched onto sandstone. Some carvings are 3,000 years old, others just centuries, creating a visual timeline of Plains life. The cliffs hold spiritual significance, believed to house powerful spirits. Wind and erosion continue shaping hoodoos and rock formations, slowly revealing and erasing these ancient messages. Writing on Stone is both archaeological treasure and sacred landscape, proof that Alberta's human story runs deeper than colonial history. And not far from those cliffs, a rock so enormous it had its own legend arrived on a glacier from another world entirely. Part 6. Lake Louise – Turquoise water that shouldn't exist. Lake Louise isn't just beautiful, it's geologically bizarre. This glacial lake glows with unreal turquoise so vivid it looks photoshopped. The color comes from rock flour, finely ground particles created when glaciers grind bedrock. Meltwater carries this powder into the lake, where it suspends and refracts sunlight into that otherworldly blue-green. The effect is strongest in summer, when glacial melt strengthens. The lake stays brutally cold year-round, yet draws millions who brave the chill for nature's surreal paint job. But not all Alberta lakes are picture-perfect. Some are remnants of apocalyptic floods. Part 5. The Okotoks Erratic. Sitting in the middle of the Alberta prairie, 8 kilometers or 5 miles from the nearest town, is a rock so out of place it looks like it was dropped there by mistake. Because it was. The Okotoks Erratic, known as Big Rock, is one of the largest glacial erratics in the world, weighing 16,500 tons. Around 17,000 years ago, a massive landslide crashed onto the surface of a glacier in the Athabasca River Valley near Jasper. That glacier carried the rock nearly 400 kilometers or 250 miles southeast before depositing it on the flat prairie far from any mountain. It's part of the Foothills Erratics Train, a 930-kilometer or 580-mile chain of quartzite boulders scattered from Jasper to Montana by retreating ice. The Blackfoot people associated the rock with Napi, their supernatural creator, and used it as a landmark for river crossings long before maps existed. Even the town of Okotoks takes its name from the Blackfoot word for rock. And while glaciers carried some landscapes hundreds of kilometers, there's one corner of Alberta the ice never managed to bury at all. Part 4. Cypress Hills – Highlands that escaped glaciation. While the last ice age buried almost all of Canada under kilometers of ice, one corner of Alberta refused to go under. The Cypress Hills, straddling the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, are one of the few places in Western Canada that survived Pleistocene glaciation, rising above the ice sheet like a frozen island. Rising to 1,466 meters or 4,810 feet, the hills are the highest point in Canada between the Rocky Mountains and Labrador. Their peaks projected above the Laurentide ice sheet as nunataks, ice-free islands in a frozen sea, preserving species that glaciers elsewhere wiped out. Over 18 species of orchids grow here, more than anywhere else on the Canadian prairies. Wildlife like elk and cougar inhabit terrain more typical of mountain foothills than prairie flatlands. And high above those hills after dark, Alberta reveals one of its most otherworldly features yet. Part 3. Dark Sky Super Reserve. You might expect the world's largest protected dark sky to be somewhere impossibly remote, and you'd be right. Wood Buffalo National Park holds the title, covering 44,807 square kilometers or 17,300 square miles of virtually unpolluted night sky. Designated by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada in 2013, the park sits along Earth's auroral oval, meaning even modest geomagnetic activity produces northern lights. On active nights, curtains of green, purple, and white sweep the sky while bison stand silently below. The darkness is so complete that the Milky Way appears as a solid band overhead. The park holds an annual Dark Sky Festival each August, drawing astronomers and Indigenous stargazers for nights that feel like standing at the edge of the universe. The designation also protects nocturnal ecology, owls, bats, and nighthawks that need genuine darkness to survive. Part 2. Ice wine and sub-zero prairie winters. Wine in Alberta? In brutal winters and frozen plains? Somehow, it works. Southern Alberta, particularly near Lethbridge, produces ice wine and cold climate varieties winning international awards. The secret? Chinook winds, long summer daylight, and dramatic temperature swings that stress grapes enough to concentrate sugars and flavors. Ice wine, made from grapes frozen on the vine and harvested in sub-zero temperatures, became Alberta's signature. Some vineyards operate near the northern edge of viable commercial viticulture, yet produce bottles competing with European standards. Alberta's wine industry proves even a province famous for oil and cattle can cultivate grapes thriving against odds. But while vineyards defy the climate on the surface, Alberta's highest point scrapes the sky in a final challenge to gravity itself. Part 1. Most Albertans do not live near the US border. When people picture Alberta, they picture wide-open prairies hugging the US border. But here's the absurd truth. The overwhelming majority of Albertans live nowhere near it. Alberta's two biggest cities, Calgary and Edmonton, sit deep in the province's interior, and together they hold over half of its 4.5 million people. Edmonton, the provincial capital, sits at latitude 53.5 degrees north, as far north as Hamburg, Germany. It's one of the northernmost major cities in North America, with a metropolitan population over 1 million. The Calgary-Edmonton corridor is one of Canada's most densely urbanized regions, running through the geographic center of the province, nowhere near the southern border. Alberta's Montana frontier is largely empty, sparse ranching country, dramatic badlands, and small towns. The cultural and economic heartbeat of this vast, extreme province beats not at its edges, but in its middle, deep in the interior, surrounded by prairies that stretch endlessly to every horizon. Alberta is, at its core, a province that never quite ends up where you'd expect it to be. So what happens when glaciers drink oceans, badlands hide dinosaurs, and frozen bubbles stack like alien architecture? Alberta is proof that nature doesn't need permission to break its own rules. If these facts changed how you see the map, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because there are still wild places, untold histories, and unbelievable landscapes left to explore. See you on the next journey.